Everybody, it's Eugene Lee Show, and welcome to Click 3D. Today I have a special guest. It's Chris Ogonek from Nikon Canada, and Chris actually spoke at the Forensic Photography Symposium last January that I held, and his topic was on mirrorless cameras, and I thought it'd be a great idea to have him on. A lot of people are going to be transitioning. They're going to be using mirrorless cameras for photogrammetry and other types of work. So, Chris, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thanks very much for having me.
So first thing, you are the product and training manager at Nikon Canada. So, and you've been doing that for, is it 12 or 13 years now?
I've been at Nikon for, 12 and a half. So right smack dab in the middle, 12 and a half years. Yeah.
Okay. And so product and training manager, so obviously training is a part of it, and being a product manager, what does that mean?
It encompasses so much. It basically, before the launch of a product, I'm testing it. I'm making sure that I know it as well as I possibly can. My ideal is to know it as well or better than anybody, so that when we go out and we launch the product, I can then go and speak to our dealers, speak to our customers, whether it's online or in person. And I will hopefully, at least in Canada, be the kind of expert on whatever products we've launched. So that includes beforehand coming up with any assets that we need to create, whether it's me shooting it, whether it's working with our ambassadors or other partners. So there's a lot that kind of goes into just making sure, scheduling wise, that all the products are launched on time, that all of the things that go along with it is launched on time. And then just the millions of behind the scenes stuff that no one really cares about, but that someone has to do.
Well, I saw you at the conference in Ontario here just not too long ago. So I know you get out to shows and stuff as well, which is nice, being back in person for a little bit. And when you started at Nikon, though, is the same position as what you started in?
No, I was what was I? Oh, goodness. 12 years ago, I have no idea. Something along the lines of a training specialist, training national trainer, something along those lines.
Oh, okay. No problem. Well, your presentation at the Forensic Photography Symposium was, I think for me, it was really interesting, because we're sort of at a point where people now are still thinking about transitioning. It's, I would say, maybe not early. I mean, mirrorless cameras are no longer, I would say, brand new or new, but people have old equipment that they're holding on to, and then they're going, do I switch over or not, right? So I think that's the big question. So I think that's why this is sort of important. So let me ask you, well, maybe just for background and people maybe that are not that familiar with it, can you explain the sort of the physical and maybe some of the operational differences between DSLR and mirrorless?
So the very simple way of kind of thinking about it is, when light travels, so the DSLR here, when light actually travels into the body, it's going to go through the lens, and then there's actually a mirror, and that mirror will flip up, and then that will expose the sensor when the shutter opens. So that mirror is essential to DSLRs, and it allows it to bounce light up into the optical viewfinder, which allows you to actually see the scene. It's kind of one of the important aspects of a DSLR. What you are seeing with your eyes is exactly the exact framing that you're going to get in the actual end resulting photo, which has been kind of the cornerstone of how people have shot for the majority of the time. There's obviously medium format and rangefinder types, but this has been the most popular form of a way to take high-end photography for many years, for decades even. But with the advent of mirrorless coming in, all of that fancy mirror mechanism that we've spent decades kind of perfecting has been removed, and that's why it's called mirrorless. So the thickness of the DSLR can be shrunk way down, because you no longer have that more that complex mirror mechanism. And even with what looks like a very large camera, this is a mirrorless camera, it's still much thinner than what the DSLR is, because when you go and open this up, all you see, well, in this case, there you go. So you see the sensor right there. So there's no other mechanical thing such as a mirror to get in the way. So Mirrorless essentially means you're making the body smaller, you're making it lighter. It allows to get into some of the things I got into the specifics of for Nikon when we switched from DSLR to mirrorless. When people see into the camera, they usually look deep into it trying to find the sensor. But the ring that you see here, this is the mount. This is what all lens is, and every camera will have a particular mount. We had ours. This is called the F mount. It hasn't changed since the late 1950s, which is crazy because it gives us really good compatibility. But the technology has moved on since then. So when you look at the Z mount on any of the Z cameras, you can see it's much larger. It's the largest in the industry. And by making the body very thin, it allows us to go and create new lenses that we've never been able to do before, whether it means that they're faster, whether it just means that they're sharper, better overall image quality, faster focus. There's a lot of different aspects to it. But that for us at Nikon is actually one of the big benefits of moving to mirrorless is you're getting access to this new mount and along with it, the new lenses. Now, that's not to say you can't use the older DSLR lenses. We have an adapter. It's the FTZ, the F2Z, kind of makes sense. The FTZ adapter. And that gives you full compatibility with over 90 F-mount lenses. You can mount over 300 of them. So there's a lot of different benefits you get with it. But when it comes down to, from a user's perspective, taking kind of Nikon out of the equation, DSLR versus mirrorless, for me, it really comes down to just a couple things. One is the smaller size and weight. Now, when I say size and weight, I mean the body's size and weight. Right.
Yeah.
That's one thing that people have to remember is if you're shooting with a lens that's f2.8, optics are optics, and optics have to follow the laws of physics. And the laws of physics says if you need a really large opening, it doesn't matter if it's DSLR or mirrorless, it's still going to be very large. Now, we have ways to kind of make it lighter, but the actual size of it is usually still relatively the same. I say that, but one of the new lenses that we just announced here, that's a 400 millimeter lens right there. And it's absolutely tiny. So I say that they're still the same size, but we're able to tweak it. But the other big benefit that people are going to see is the electronic viewfinder. Now, that for me is a benefit. Some people don't see it as a benefit. And this is kind of where that divide that you were talking about, where some people are holding onto their older gear. And the EVFs, the electronic viewfinders, the EVFs, they're reaching now a point where they're good enough for 90% of people out there. There's still some people who like the look of an optical viewfinder. It's because it's what they've been used to for decades. But the technology behind the EVFs is getting really, really solid. And on something like a Z9, our top of the line camera, it is so natural and it just looks so fluid that you almost can't even tell the difference. So they're definitely getting there. But the EVF being able to see exactly what you are going to shoot before you shoot it is a big benefit because you get to figure out your exposure. Obviously, for photogrammetry or other, let's say, forensic uses, you don't really care about being creative and shooting black and white. But if you are interested in photography and you want to go and shoot in black and white, well, now you can visualize what that black and white image looks like before you even shoot it.
Right.
So really, really kind of cool creative aspects of it before you even snap the photo.
Let me ask you a question about, so before, how has metering and autofocus changed from DSLR to mirrorless? And have there been any improvements?
Metering has changed, not all that much. It's I'll say relatively the same, but the biggest difference, both autofocus and metering, is it's all done directly on the sensor now. So with a DSLR, you have a small, if I took it apart, you actually have the brains of the autofocus system. It's actually in the bottom of the camera. And so the light comes in and a little bit of light is actually trickled down into the autofocus module down at the bottom. So there's actually a separate location for where the autofocus is captured with a DSLR versus a mirrorless, because with that sensor that you can see, well, the autofocus is done directly on that sensor. So what that means is accuracy of focus is much higher on a mirrorless camera because there's no discrepancy between where the focus is kind of captured and where it's relayed to the system to go and tell the lens where to move. Whereas with a mirrorless camera, it's on the sensor and that's where it's captured as well. So there's no chance, very little, if ever chance, of front or back focusing. So it's very, very accurate with mirrorless cameras. And that's because the autofocus points are directly on the sensor rather than having that separate module.
I see. Now you talked about I'm going to go back to the EVF for a second, because is that the main thing that like a photographer will find is different for them, or what are some of the bigger like the big differences that somebody transitioning over has to get used to?
I would definitely say that the EVF is the number one. Some people instantly they click and they love it. They never want to go back. Others take a little bit of time to get used to it. And once they do, they never want to go back. But then there are some people out there who have just been shooting with an optical viewfinder for so long that it's their comfort zone. It's what they want. So there's no right or wrong. Personally, for me, I love the EVF. I love being able to see that simulated exposure preview before I even shoot. There's so many benefits that I can get from it, along with the fact that if you're manually focusing, you now have a lot of focus aids. Something called focus peaking allows you to really make fine adjustments to your manual focus and see it really easily. Whereas with a DSLR, I have horrible eyes. I am not going to trust myself to manually focus with a DSLR. I will let the camera go and do it. But with a mirrorless camera, it's much easier because it's so much more electronic and there's a lot more advancements to it. So I'd say that's the number one thing, to be totally honest with you, is to kind of get over that hurdle. There are obviously small differences. Even if you pick up two cameras that are very similar, a DSLR and a mirrorless camera, let's say the D780 and the Z6 II, even though they have very similar autofocus modes, they work slightly differently. Now, for landscape shooting, portraiture, there's not going to be that much of a difference. But if you're really pushing the envelope, if you're doing sports photography, action, birds in flight, then you kind of have to mine down and just kind of figure out what works with one camera over the other. But that comes with any camera body change, regardless of DSLR or mirrorless.
What about like in forensics, for example? Low light is important because you're often doing, you could be wherever, whenever. And in terms of light sensitivity and ISO, that sort of thing, what does the mirrorless offer there?
To be honest, it's the same. The image quality that you would get out of, let's say, if you're shooting with a D780, the D780 has the exact same sensor as Z6 II. So if you love the low light capability at ISO 10,000, when you really have to push it on a D780, you are getting that exact quality out of a Z6 II. Same with a D850 versus a Z7 II or a Z9. The high ISO image quality is going to be virtually identical.
Okay. I want to ask you about the camera model. So at the time of the symposium, I think the Z9 was like just coming out. It was kind of new. So, and you kind of didn't get into all the models, but here I want to ask you about them. So I don't know, maybe talk about how many models, like the different models, and which ones would you recommend for like different types of people, and especially forensics, because that's my area. So if you have one in mind that's like, hey, this would be pretty good for that. And I don't know, it may be because of size or weight, I don't know but what can you tell us about the different models maybe?
So I would say there's two different main camps to think of. There's the crop sensor and then full frame. For most of forensic work, I would probably say full frame. That's what a lot of the recommendations we give are for. But if you are looking for something small, light, that you don't necessarily need to shoot in low light situations as much, then the crop sensor cameras are great. So we actually just announced one last week. So we have a Z30, so that's our entry level Z30, then the Z50, then the ZFC. The ZFC isn't really for forensics work, but it looks really cool. So it kind of has that kind of heritage Nikon
retro look.
Yeah. So the ZFC, so a Z30, no EVF. You're basically only ever using the screen on the back. Then the Z50 gets an EVF, still nice and small. Then the ZFC, it kind of has that retro look. So I would say if you're looking for DX, I would say probably the Z50. is a good place because it lets you go and use that viewfinder if you are in the really bright sunlight outside and you do still want to see that scene in front of you well. You can go and use the EVF, but it's still going to go and give you a good low light quality. Getting into full frame though, we have 4 models. Yeah, the Z5. The Z6 II, the Z7 II, and then the Z9. The Z9 I probably wouldn't recommend for most forensic uses. There are a few cases that I've loaned, or I'm going to loan it out, hopefully to a unit in the near future. They're going to be doing blood splatter analysis. And for that, obviously, you're going to want relatively high resolution and high speed. So that's really kind of where the Z9 really nicely fits in. So that's what kind of on the high end. Oh, sorry.
What kind of what's the resolution? What's the top resolution on that?
45 megapixels.
Okay.
Yeah. So pretty good resolution. And the speed is just, if you want to shoot RAW, you can get up to 20 frames a second. And then if you want even faster, if you want to shoot JPEG only, you can shoot 30 frames a second. Or if you want JPEG at 11 megapixels, if that's high enough resolution for you, you can do 120 frames per second. So speed is not an issue. Yeah, with the Z9, speed is not an issue. But that's for small case uses, blood splatter. For most other forensic uses, the Z9 is probably a little bit of overkill. Same with the Z7 II. The Z7 II has the same resolution, 45 megapixels, but it's not as fast. So Z7 II I generally wouldn't recommend for forensic use. It really comes down to the two models, the Z5 or the Z6 II. Z5 is going to be really, really enticing for a lot of people because of the price point. It's under 2,000 Canadian dollars, and for the body, when it goes on sale, it goes even lower. It gives you probably 75-80% of what the Z6 II can do. So it's fully weather sealed. It has in-body image stabilization. That means that any lens you put on it is going to be stabilized because the sensor actually moves. So full weather sealing, good autofocus, the IBIS system. Yeah, there's a lot that really kind of will grab people with the Z5. The Z6 II, the biggest differentiator for forensics use is, I would say, it's fairly small, but it can be big, if that makes sense. It's the low light capabilities, not only in the high ISO, but also the autofocus capabilities. So you are going to be able to shoot at a little bit higher ISO and get cleaner files. And then when you're actually focusing in very, very low light, you are going to get better capability out of the Z6 II. The Z5 is still very good, but it's just not quite as good as the Z6 II.
The Z6 II. Okay, yeah, interesting. Well, you've already talked about some of the lenses, and I'm assuming that you've added, because it sounds like you've added some lenses to the family already. But what is well, there's 2 avenues here. One is you buy everything new. The other one is I got some old stuff, and then you've already mentioned about the spacers. So is how many different spacers, or how do you match the spacer to the type of lens that you have? And does one spacer work with like several lenses, old lenses type of thing?
Yep. So we have 1. Technically, we have 2, but 1 is discontinued. So it's basically just the new updated version of it. So it's the FTZ2. That's the adapter we have. And I actually love that you call it a spacer. And even though technically we call it an adapter, when you say the word adapter, people go, "Oh, what am I losing with this adapter? I'm adapting something. I'm losing light. I'm losing quality. And you don't lose anything. There's no glass in it whatsoever. It's literally just like you called it, a spacer. All it's doing is it's providing the correct distance for what the F-mount lenses require. And the nice thing is that one spacer, it will work with any of our F-mount lenses. We have over 360 of them that will mount onto it, and then that can just go onto any of our Z bodies, and there's no issue. Now, there's some caveats as to how old is your lens. If it's obviously a manual focus lens, you're only going to get manually focusing capabilities. If you do have an autofocus lens, the one caveat is that if you have, so we have a couple different versions. Older versions are called D lenses, D like David, and the D lenses have an aperture ring on it. Those will not focus on a Z body. They'll focus on a DSLR because most DSLRs will have an autofocus motor in the body that will actually drive the lens, whereas the Z bodies do not. So that's the one caveat, is if you have a D lens. And for most forensic use, the only real lens that I would say that's popular or was popular years ago was the 24 to 85. It was an f2.8 to f4, and it had a kind of a pseudo macro capability. So it was a nice all-around lens. You could basically have one 24 to 85 on there. You could do some 1 to 2 macro work, and a lot of units liked it because you didn't have to swap lenses too much in dusty or dirty environments. So that was a benefit, but that D lens will not work. If you have a G, G like Gary, or E like Everett, those two classes of lenses will work no problem.
Okay. And in terms of, so for example, in forensics, macro lenses are really important. So what kind of family or what kind of different types of macro lenses do you have that would be suitable for forensic work?
So they're very similar to the DSLR side of things. So on the DSLR side, we had a 105 f2.8, and then we had a 60 f2.8. Now on the Z mount side, we have a 105 f2.8, and then we have a 50 millimeter. So it's a little bit wider than the 60, not too much. But for most forensic work, I would probably say the 50 is going to be more popular. Obviously, there's going to be some people who prefer the 105 for the way that they use it. But I would say the 50 f2.8 is probably going to be the most popular option for the Z series.
Okay. And what's like Nikon is just going to be slowly keep adding to the family, as time goes on, you're just going to keep adding, is there anything you can say about the current plan for adding lenses and such, or what's the release sort of time period?
Well, we're over 25 lenses already. So in just 3.5 years or so, what are we, 2022? Yeah, so 4 years. In 4 years, we've come out with over 25 dedicated Nikkor Z lenses, which is pretty impressive by itself. But we do have a roadmap that we've publicly, that we have on our website. And while we don't go and say the pricing, when it will be available, any of the specifications, we definitely do have some of the, we're coming out with this, don't worry, we're coming out with this. So we have an 85 mil on there. We just announced a 400 f4.5 last week. So we're constantly coming up with new bodies, but also new lenses as well, to really make sure that we flesh out and make sure that we have as robust of a Z lens lineup as we did with the F mount size. Now, obviously, I've talked about the compatibility of the F mount and how it goes back decades. So it's going to take us a little bit of time to get up to that level. But in terms of the overall general focal lengths that people will have access to, they already have a pretty good lineup. And now we're starting to kind of fill in the more finer details.
Okay. So with the new lenses, because you had a chance to sort of hit the reset button and say, okay, we're going to, if we had to design this over again, this is what we would do. But in terms of the optics and the clarity, and can you, I mean, as an experienced photographer, can you see a difference, or can you notice a difference? Are there things that you notice that you could say, yeah, the old lenses were good, but these ones are better? Absolutely.
And that's one of the things that when we came out with the Z system and we were initially talking about the new Z mount, people were just like, okay, cool, marketing. Good for you, Nikon. You went and created a new mount. What does that actually do for you? But real world differences you can see when you go and pick up, let's say, the regular F mount version, and then you grab the Z mount version. And if you do comparisons, and I am a very picky person, a very, very picky and particular person. I like to do my tests. My tests are very boring. I usually don't show them to people because they are just going to get bored out of their mind looking at the images. But I like to go and do a one-to-one comparison. Okay, we have a 14 to 24 f2.8 for the F mount. I'll go and compare the new Z 14 to 24 f2.8 for the Z mount. And I'll shoot them wide angle, I'll shoot them close, I'll shoot them far, I'll shoot all sorts of different tests. And the biggest one for me that really blew me away was actually this lens. It was what I had on the Z9 here. So this is the kit lens. This is a 24 to 70 f4. Now, most people, when they hear kit lens, they go, yeah. Okay. I'm buying this because it's coming at a deal, and that's the only real reason Nikon's giving it away, because they don't want it. And in the past, and other kit lenses out there still kind of sometimes follow that path. But this lens was the first kit lens that we had coming out with the system back in whatever it was 2018. And I compared the kit lens, against our top of the line, over $2,500 24-70 f2.8 VR f-mount lens. This blew it out of the water. Now, obviously, the f2.8 is f2.8. This is f4. So if you need that little bit of extra bokeh, then that's a differentiator that I didn't want to touch. But just in terms of sharpness, when you buy this with a kit, you're getting it for under $1,000. It's like $800 as a lens, and you're spending over $2,500 on the f2.8 version. And optically wise, this is better in every single way. We're talking shooting wide open sharpness. We're talking shooting stop down. We're talking looking at the center, looking at the corners. In any way that you want to go and compare lenses, the Z-mount lenses, when you do a side-by-side comparison, blow the F-mount lenses out of the water. And that's not to say that the F-mount lenses were not the best in their class already. It just really enabled our engineers to just like you said, start from scratch. What is the best way to really actually show difference to our customers? And it was make the mount as wide as possible, make that flange distance as thin as possible. It means much less refracting of light within the actual lens itself. And the less you have to bend light, the sharper it's going to be, especially at the corner. So one of the big benefits, I would say, for portrait photographers, not necessarily for forensics use, because with forensics, you're usually stopping down. But for a portrait photographer, there was always kind of that balance of you want to shoot wide open, because you want to get a really blurry background, but you want to stop down a little bit because you also want really sharp eyes. And generally, if I gave most photographers an F-mount lens and I said, take this lens and I want you to shoot it at its sharpest aperture, almost every single photographer is going to go right instantly to f5.6, f8, because they know that shooting wide open, sure, you're going to get some nice blurry backgrounds, but you're not going to get kind of ultimate sharpness. With these Z lenses, if you're going to be ridiculously picky, maybe stopping if you have like a 51.4, an 80, or sorry, a 51.8 or an 85 1.8, and maybe if you stop down to 2.8, you're going to hit critical sharpness, but you're not going to see a difference between f2.8, f4, f5.6, and f8. It's pretty much reaching critical sharpness much faster. So you don't have to kind of have that balancing act anymore, which is just, it frees up a lot of different photographers to just kind of get the most out of their gear without having to worry about any of the downsides to it.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about photogrammetry and reconstructing models. That sharpness is often really important. And actually, just to a comment you said before, but actually, I normally shut off the stabilization because you don't want the sensor moving in a photogrammetry thing. So you typically, and that I'm pretty sure that's an option to shut it off. I think
absolutely
on some of the cameras. Yeah. Okay. Good. Let me ask you something else in terms of operating and controlling the camera. So oftentimes, like I'm doing sort of kind of very special setups, really close up and things like that. And I don't even want to touch the camera. I want to fire it remotely, or I want to be able to see it or view it through a monitor or something else. What kind of control options are there? Like, is there like Wi-Fi, tethered stuff, apps? Like what kinds of things do you have in that regard?
Okay, so anybody watching now, we're now going to go into a 3-hour dissertation on the different ways to. So there are a number of ways, and I'm kind of looking over here because I was actually just talking about this, helping a police unit get set up with these. So there's a number of different ways. I'll kind of start off with the basic, go to the higher end, and then I'll go to the free option. So this is a Bluetooth remote. This doesn't work with every single Nikon Z camera. It works with most. All of the DX, well, not even all the DX, the Z30, the ZFC, and then the Z6 II, Z7 II, and the Z9. This will go and work with them. And you can see there's a number of buttons here. You can go and start recording video. You can take a photo. You can focus. You can do all sorts of things with it. So this is a very easy option. It's under $50. I want to say it's about 35. And this will just allow you to very simply, once you've paired it with the camera, go and trigger your camera without having to worry about it. Now, it is Bluetooth, as I mentioned, so there is a limit in terms of the distance that you have to be from it. If you're, I've got it working about 15, 20, 25 feet away, depending on the environment that you're in. But you do have to be mindful of that. We do have a higher end radio version. That radio version, you plug in a little controller into the camera, and then you again have a little remote, and that remote can now fire easily 50, 60, 70 feet away. We rate it at like 67 feet. I've got it working over 100, 150 feet away. And the nice thing about that is you don't need line of sight. You don't have to worry, is there a tree in the way? Is there a building? Are you shooting from another room? You don't have to worry about that at all. Now, it is obviously much more expensive because it is radio, much more advanced technologies. But if you need that distance or that reliability, then that really comes into its own, and that's the WR kit. So the Bluetooth is the MLL7. That's the Nikon MLL7. Then for the radio versions, it's the either WR11A or the WR11B, and that just depends on the camera you have, whether it plugs into the 10-pin port or into the side of the camera. And then the free option is using your phone. So every one of our cameras right now has the ability to go and use our free app. It's called SnapBridge. And with most of the newer cameras, the Z30, the ZFC, the Z5, Z6, Z7 series, the Z9, they have all the new ability to either do a Wi-Fi remote or a Bluetooth remote. Now, the reason I kind of make that distinction is if let's say you want to go and see a preview on your phone of your setup, you would want to go and use Wi-Fi because it obviously has higher bandwidth. So you can go and turn on the Wi-Fi. It'll say, do you want to connect your Wi-Fi network? Yes. And then there'll be a Wi-Fi connection between the two of them. And you'll actually be able to change quite a number of features, whether it's your shutter speed, your aperture, your ISO, your white balance. You want to focus, you want to go and take your shot, you go and see it all before you actually shoot it, which is great. The downside to Wi-Fi is obviously much worse battery life, both on your camera, your camera, and on your phone. So if all you need to do is basically set up your camera and don't touch it, you don't care about seeing a live preview, all of our newer cameras in the last maybe year and a half, 2 years, they all have a Bluetooth remote function, which basically the camera's already going to be connected using SnapBridge with our Bluetooth, and it's just going to basically be a dummy trigger. So it's just going to let you focus, take a video, or take a stills image. And if that's all you need, you already have it built into your phone, and it's a great way to shoot. So make sure, depending on what model you have, that you check out if it is compatible with the Bluetooth remote photography function. But yeah, those are the main ways to go and have a remote trigger of your camera. If we're going to talk about tethering, this is where the ball of yarn becomes strewn all over the place because there's so many different options. There's so many different options. We have our own. We have a paid option, which gives you anything you could ever want in terms of changing the settings in your camera before you even click the button on your computer. That's called Camera Control Pro 2. It is paid software, but it is the most robust that you're going to find basically anywhere. And because it does come from us, one of the nice things is, let's say you buy a Z9 and the next day you want to go and tether with it. If you go and use Lightroom, if you go and use Capture One, if you use DxO, they will not, guaranteed, they will not have the ability to tether with this camera. That comes out 6 months, 8 months, a year and a half down the road. So Camera Control Pro 2 is incredibly robust. We do have a free version of it. It's called NX Tether. And NX Tether will allow you to, it's basically, think of it like a plugin. So if you want to still use Lightroom, and you want to have functionality with your new camera, then you can go and use NX Tether, which basically just connects the two. So you open NX Tether, you have it talk to Lightroom, and then when you fire on your computer, on your camera, it'll get sent to your Lightroom folder. So there is a way to do it, but it's just not as robust of the functionality. So if you're doing focus shift shooting, right, like focus stacking, you will not have that functionality with your Lightroom NX Tether option. But with Camera Control Pro 2, you can go and set up focus shift shooting and have all of the different variables lined up, and you just hit go and it'll work. So Then we get into whether you want to tether wired or wireless. That's a whole different discussion. But yes, there's a million different ways to do it.
So what kind of, if I just want to look at like a larger view, like a monitor or something like that, is there just like a mini HDMI port, or what kind of port do you have on the side of the cameras to do that?
It depends on the camera. So most of them will have a mini HDMI. The Z9 is a full HDMI. That will allow you to go to, let's say, a TV and just basically see a reproduced version, a mirrored version of that. So you can just see either the image after you've shot it or see the scene before you shoot it. So that's good. But if you do want to go in the view to your computer, they also basically, every camera except the Z50 has USB-C. So if you do want to plug it into your computer and then work with tethered software, whether it's NX Tether, Camera Control Pro 2, Lightroom, you will be able to get a preview on your computer prior to. But yeah, HDMI, if you just want a simple way to just plug into a TV, then HDMI is definitely the way to do it. And it'll either be a micro HDMI, a mini HDMI, or a full HDMI, depending on which model you have.
Oh, awesome. And so next question is, what can you tell us that nobody else knows now? What's next with Nikon? What's coming out? We want all the dirt and all the secrets. Or is there anything that is public right now?
No, there's not much. We usually keep things pretty close to the chest. We have been much more open in the last little bit. The fact that we have a lens roadmap for the Z series, that would have been unthinkable back in the days of just DSLRs, where we never say what it is that we're going to come out with. But we have on there a 200 to 600. We have an 85 mil. We have a 600 mil. So there's a lot of different things that we've discussed. Even for something simple like the Z9, we announced this in October, and we basically said when we announced the camera, oh, but wait, there's more. And we told about a future firmware that we were going to have for the camera, which we announced back, I believe it was in April. And we actually just had another firmware update for the camera yesterday on July 5th. What was yesterday? Yeah, July 5th. So yeah, we're constantly doing firmware updates with the Z bodies, which is really, really nice, because with DSLRs, when they leave the factory, all of the technology is kind of built in, and there's very little that can be changed unless there's a spelling mistake, unless there's a bug in the actual camera. There's really very little that we can do with them. But with the mirrorless cameras, they're much more software driven, so we can go and make firmware updates that heavily improve the cameras to the point where it's like, oh my God, I have a new camera in my hands and the firmware update is free. So that for me is the coolest thing about mirrorless, is how much further we're able to push them. But other than the Z9, we usually don't really say exactly when or what features we're going to have until we actually come out with it.
Well, you sort of raised the next question for me then. What is the firmware update process like on the cameras?
So we have two different ways to do it. We have the old-fashioned way, which is you go to our website, you download it, you put a memory card into a memory card reader, you see it little pop up, you open it, and then you'll grab the file that you've downloaded, or that you've opened, and then you're going to drag that into the root folder. So that's got to be the main folder of the memory card. Pop it into the actual camera, and then you just go down to the setup menu and say firmware update. Yes. Make sure you have a full battery. If you have it under 80% in your battery life, it will not do it, because it wants to make sure that it has enough juice to be able to do the entire firmware update. So that's kind of the old way of doing it. I actually just updated the camera that you're seeing me through is the Z6 II. I actually just updated that firmware earlier today, and I did it through my phone. So with the Z6 II, the Z7 II, the Z9, the ZFC, and the Z30, all of those cameras can actually update the firmware directly using SnapBridge. So when you pair the two of them and you go into it, you'll actually see a little indicator on the top right hand of the screen saying, oh, just so you know, you have new firmware. You click go to it, and then you click continue, and it'll actually download the firmware from our servers onto your phone, and then it will transfer it from your phone onto the memory card in your camera. You obviously have to have a memory card in the camera, but it just kind of helps streamline the entire firmware update workflow, so that you don't need a memory card reader. You don't need to kind of jump through the hoops of going onto your computer. It's just, okay, download, transfer, boom, all done.
Awesome. Chris, I've been trying to get you on here for a long time, and this is why, because you're a wealth of knowledge. So if somebody has any questions or they want to reach out to you, what's the best place to get you at? Is it like link? I know you're on LinkedIn and you're on some other places, I think, too, but
yep.
What's the best place for people to reach out to you?
To be honest, LinkedIn is the best way. I don't really do Facebook that much. I do have Instagram. It's more of a personal one. It's kind of locked off. So if you want to add me on there, see Ogonek, you feel free. But I will have to kind of allow you to, because I just have it for a smaller group of people. So it's not just yay, this is my life to everybody. And it's not just me doing Nikon promos. It's just me shooting what I like and then putting the photos out there. So yeah, I'm on Instagram, but LinkedIn is probably the best way for people to track me down. And I don't check it all that often, so please don't be offended if I take a couple days to get back to you. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right on. Well, listen, Chris, thanks so much for being here. You're always like a great resource and great to bounce ideas and things off of. And yeah, I'm eager to try. I haven't tried one of the new cameras yet, but I'm really interested to try it for photogrammetry and see what kinds of things they can do in the future. So hopefully I'll have that opportunity soon. So, hey, thanks again. I really appreciate everything.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.